What is up, theology nerds? This is Trip, and you're listening to the Homebrewed Christianity podcast, where we bring you the most zesty ideological ingredients to put in your brain piece, and brew your own faith. And today on the podcast, you're going to get to experience two different little itty-bitty, by itty-bitty I mean less than an hour, chats that I had at the Subvert the Norm conference at Drury University. It was one of the sessions and then the main room, and it started off, I kind of say some stuff at the beginning, and then I interviewed the one and only JC, that's right, Jack Caputo, about his new book, Hoping Against Hope, and what it was like to be like this world-famous, like top-notch philosopher and write a text for normal people, trying to expand the philosophical good news of God's insistence. That's what the book's about. And he talks not only about the text, but the process of honing and directing and using his wisdom for a larger audience. Then after that, my friend, and you know, the podcast coolest peeps, the one and only Jonnie, he joins, and he talks to me about my new book, and then the similar process and questions, and we talk about jazz. So that happens. So before we jump in to this little ditty, I just want to say, heads up, if you live in San Francisco, I'm going to be up that way. Actually, I'm going to be in Berkeley on the 4th of February doing a live podcast at the GTU. You should check it out. It's free to come. Sign up. You even get free beverages and a Heretic Brewing Company. That's right, the brewing company. It's founded by Jamil Zainasheff. That's right, an Ninkasi multiple award winner, greatest home brewer that is, went pro, and part of the Brewing Network, which is the coolest home brewing beer podcast. They're going to be bringing the heretical beverages that evening, and I will try to come up with at least one heresy I'm comfortable saying with on a microphone. You'll have some beer, you'll have some friends, we'll have some groups singing, and you'll be interacting with theologians and stuff from all the different schools at the GTU. The next day, there'll be a live streaming podcast, a Lectiocast I'm going to do, since I'm up there hanging out with Daniel Kirk. I'm going to do one the next night. It's going to be live streaming. You'll all be able to sign up soon. And we're going to do a Lectiocast on the clobber passages. Maybe call it a clobbercast. We're going to walk through all the texts that many Christians use to hate on our gay, lesbian, transgender, bisexual brothers and sisters. We're going to walk through them, talk about them, put them in their historical context, try to understand them theologically, in hopes that more of the listeners will be equipped to at least have some people pause long enough to think about being a little more loving, generous, or imagining that the God revealed in Scripture is at least as nice as Jesus. Who knows? But that live streaming thing, you'll get info about it soon. And then in March, first week of March, you have the Unfolding Theology event here at the Hatchery in Redondo Beach, where I'm Director of Theology and the Humanities. The 3rd to the 5th, Philip Clayton and I will be emceeing this interactive constructive theology workshop, the greatest, most nerdy, geekish event of all time, I'm thinking, theologically. Like, where else are you going to have an adult theological coloring book? And then think through the dominant framing questions around God, like problem of evil, revelation, science, pluralism, and things, with 4 different amazing theologians. Adam Clark, who's writing the Homebrewed Guide to Salvation, head of the Black Theology Group at the American Academy of Religion. Friend of the podcast, been on before. He's going to be there representing. You're going to have Cynthia Rigby. She's there. She is like a printing grade, so it's like a Bardian feminist. They're representing Presbyterian Theological Seminary in Austin, is where she's from. She's head of the Christian Systematic Theology Group at the American Academy of Religion. Very popular in the classroom teacher as well. So you got both of them there. Amish Young, that's right, like the world's most amazing, famous, Fuller Theological Seminary charismatic theologian. And then Keith Ward, boom shakalaka, like the Queen's Regent Professor at Oxford University. Everyone's favorite open and relational evolutionary panentheist who advocates for philosophical idealism today. And if you don't even know what those words mean, but you want to know, you should come. Yeah. So just go to unfoldingtheology.com. You can find out more. And the cool thing is, if you sign up and type in the word homebrewed in the little code area, you'll get 2 extra days, March 1st and 2nd, where you're going to have an interactive radical theological explosion with Jack Caputo, Barry Taylor, Peter Rollins, moi, and a homebrewed deacon. beer bus tour through some of the coolest craft breweries in LA. There you go. So thank you so much for listening, and I hope you enjoyed this podcast. Go to homebrewedchristianity.com and connect with us. Most of all, I just want to thank you, all 80-some people who are members of the Homebrewed community that donate every month. Some of them $5 all the way up to $50 to be a part of supporting this, helping pay people to edit, to fix the website, to connect and organize to getting the best voices and stuff here. If you're a member of it, thank you. If you're starting off and loving the podcast and want to connect more, do some support, get more content and access to stuff, then think about joining. Just go to homebrewedcommunity.com. Those are the people that make this podcast keep happening and keep coming and delivering right there in your earbuds for the grand total of 0 cents. Now, hopefully the content of it has some sense to it, but it doesn't have to have much because, it's any sense when you're talking about God is more sense than most have. Anyway, talk to you later. Share the brew. Before I jump in, Jack, I know that between times we're at Subverting the Norm, you've noticed more and more people, places you go, resonating with what's happening here. So I thought maybe you might have your own way of encouraging or calling from people who wonder whether or not, they're ready to get their a voice out there, some edifying or encouraging words.
Well, I think this Pew study that just came out in the last couple of weeks that shows this increasing number of nuns among the millennials it may just be a passing spike that doesn't mean anything, but it's the Pew people, the statisticians say, it's pointing to a trend. It's not a large change, but it's a constant change over every 5-year period. I think it's a 5-year period that they do it. And I think that's telling. I think that I'm hoping it's a trend, and I think it's a trend. And if it is a trend, it's one that I myself am in particular interested in inhabiting, invading, subverting, encouraging. I spent a good deal of my life quoting dead Germans in my footnotes. This is a great way to put it. It just broke me up back there. And now that I'm retired, I don't have to. I still do that. I still keep up the academic work I do because that's funding it. That's where it's coming from. But I'm free now to address an audience that I wasn't free to address, that I could only sort of do on the side when I was teaching full time. And I really am now an independent scholar. The young people who can't find a job when they put in the program, they'll put for their affiliation, independent scholar. That means they're starving and homeless and jobless. And but I really am an independent scholar because I'm retired and I have a pension and I can do what I want. Well, what I want, and it's one of the reasons that I like Subverting the Norm so much, what I want is to talk to people who don't believe anymore what they were taught in 4th grade and who don't believe nothing, who believe something, they just don't know what. And they don't know how to conceptualize it, they don't know how to articulate it, and they're looking for a vocabulary, and they're looking for somebody to speak American English and give them a theoretical resource for it. And that's the nuns, that's a lot of people in this room, it's all the recovering fundamentalists and recovering Catholics and recovering whatever, that are restless with the mythologization that religion has been subjected to in this country, and the primitive superstition in which it's steeped, but who don't think that it's nonsense, who think that there is something going on there, which can be put in American English. That's what I'm trying to do myself. That's what I like about this series. That's what I take this series to be.
Yeah, and maybe you could say a bit about what it was like to tell your own kind of autobiographical journey, while also, being a philosopher at the same time. Like I know that in my that seminar you do in your PhD program, where they tell you how to present at conferences. Like at the bottom, Cynthia is giving this seminar at the bottom. She put, and make sure you don't lapse into being human. And I was like, that's really funny. And you typed it on the paper. But in it, you're not only human, it made me want to hang out with you more, Jack.
Yeah, well, I mean, I gave this manuscript to Fortress, and the opening chapter is pretty much the chapter that's in there right now. And that was the one and only autobiographical element in the book. And occasionally I would refer back to it, but very sporadically and without, it was no intention to pursue that beyond an opening chapter that would sort of hook the reader and get them into listening to the theory. And but Fortress loved the first chapter, and they kept pressing me to put more and more of that in, and to throw out some of the theories. So there's a whole chapter on Hegel that's back in a drawer back home, that never
Did you cry a little bit?
Well, actually, no. I got into it. I mean, I thought it was interesting. It was fun. It started to get to be fun, and so virtually all the autobiographical stuff that comes after the first chapter was done in a rewrite in the second version. It's not in the first version. I had given the first version to a friend of mine to read, and he said to me, "Is the book out now? Now that the book's out, is that the same manuscript?" And I said, "Well, it's sort of the same manuscript." And we went back and forth with that, weaving the theory together with the autobiographical stuff, and then finally building up that whole dialogue between Jackie and Brother Paul and the professor. That all was under Fortress's pressure. I mean, they kept telling me more of that. You don't need to say this. Forget that. That's just going to confuse everybody. Throw it out. What about Jackie? And so I listened to them. I thought, look, I should listen to these people because they know how to sell books. And they know what people can, they know what is going to be readable for this audience, and I don't. Or they know it better than I do. So I listened to them, and I followed their prompts. And I had a good time, actually, by the time it was over. And so we'll see. Although it must be working because it's being viciously attacked on Amazon right now. Well,
so it's important for you to know, the best thing you can do on your phone is to go give his book an Amazon review with 5 stars that doesn't suggest eternal conscious torment for Jack. Because
they somehow or another it fell into the hand of the heresy hunters, who are just plowing through it looking for heresies. And at one point, some reviewer said, I suggested a scene in which Jesus and Buddha meet each other, bow to each other, and ask each other what they have, and each seeks to learn from the other what they have to say in a respectful, I'm talking about interfaith dialogue. So somebody said, that violates the commandment that thou shalt not worship false gods. And I thought, first I thought, this is terrible. These incompetent readers whose brains have been destroyed by their religion are reviewing this book and giving it 1 star. And then I thought, actually, for the people that interest me, the people I'm trying to reach, it's probably good, because they'll see that maybe this is a book that talks to people who no longer believe that they were taught in 4th grade. But in any case, it's being slaughtered. It's got the worst Amazon reviews I've ever had in my life. And it's the only time in my life I've actually looked at the Amazon reviews. because we're trying to sell it.
Yeah, well, you could just think for every hour they spent reading your book and writing horrible reviews, their family on Facebook had less horrible comments posted on every time they shared news stories that thought the Earth was more than 6,000 years old or something. So, the other question I thought it would be fun, could you say a little bit, because they all have not yet purchased and reviewed the book on Amazon, say a bit about the parallelism between you and Derrida's story that you develop in the book, The Jackie Thing?
Yeah, well, in 1988, Derrida published 89, he published a book that was a kind of repetition or retrieval of Augustine's Confessions. And it's a good example of postmodernism. What modernist critics of religion do is look at St. Augustine's Confessions and try to bomb it, and destroy it with its subjectivity, its mythology, and they look upon it as faith versus reason, and they can't read it. They don't know how to read it. They don't read. It's what's becoming a philosophy. Philosophy has become, as Derrida said, logocentric. It's so preoccupied with logical argumentation that it can't read, it can't see, it can't hear. It's become bloodless. And whereas, and that's just sort of the final thrashing about of the dying body of modernism in philosophy. Postmodernism is a form of reading and reading carefully. And so what Derrida does is he treats the Confessions as a book which is way ahead of him, that he's just trying to catch up to, that he wants to not destroy or critique in a modernist way or in a reductionist way, but to inhabit. So he puts himself in the shoes of Augustine and begins speaking to somebody, because the Confessions is addressed to thee, to te, God. And so Derrida does the same thing. He's talking to you. So he adopts the posture of prayer in the Confessions, and then repeats his own life with the model of the magisterial model of Augustine's Confessions in front of him. But he repeats it the way an atheistic, Jewish, secular, left-wing, left-bank French intellectual would.
That's immediately obvious.
Right? So you get that. You get this Jewish, atheistic, secular intellectual putting himself in the shoes of Augustine, weeping over the death of his mother, praying, asking himself, what do I love when I love my God? And revealing these stories about himself. And I was on a plane at the time when I first got the book. And my instinct was to run to the front of the plane, bang on the cockpit door, say, stop the plane, I got to get off. I got to write a book called The Prayers and Tears of Jacques Derrida. Well, one of the things that he does in this book is reveal that his name is not Jacques. His name is Jackie. And I thought, I can't deal with this. This is overwhelming. Until I was about 12 years old, everybody in the family and all the kids I went to grade school with called me Jackie. And then as you get older, you shed the diminutive, and then you become Jack. And then eventually I became John D. And I was hiding, Jackie was hiding behind John D. And, Derrida says that the first time he tells us in this book that when it came time to publish his first book, he's about to sign the title page, and he says, I can't put down Jackie. It's ridiculous. ridiculous. It's a ridiculous name. It's it's a family name. It's what it's what my mother calls me. And so he just made the sort of alliteration from Jackie to Jacques. Although in English, Jack would be a nickname for John, and Jacques would be James. But he just went from Jackie to Jacques. But on his passport, on everything, his name is Jacques. So, in the Presenteers, I refer to a game of jacks, in which I'm never sure whether he said it, I said it, or I was saying it as a way of glossing what he said. And truly, at certain points in my life, I don't know which one of us said which. And so in this book, I go back to Jackie at the beginning, to Jackie at the beginning, and at the very end, the very final thing, the last page is an imaginary conversation in which Jackie shows up as a long-lost Jewish atheistic uncle, and how how an Italian Catholic family could have a Jewish atheistic Algerian uncle is fortunately something you don't need to explain in a dream. And so that book is a dialogue of Jackie and Jackie.
When I read that part, I thought, finally someone else is admitting they have dreams with philosophers and theologians in it, because I used to think it was really weird that I did. And in my book, I tell a story about having a very disturbing dream. Jesus always inhabits other people's bodies, which, if you're really into John Cobb and the movement of creative transformation out of the Logos into material existence, creative transformation can take up anything and become the embodied word and address you. It just so happens in my dreams, the Logos tends to show up looking like Bob Marley. And I was duct taped my mouth shut, and Bob Marley and Reinhold Niebuhr had like an hour and a half argument. And I woke up just drenched in sweat. And then I started humming, "Don't worry." Anyway, so not that you talked to Bob Marley in yours, I just thought to myself, finally, as someone else is admitting it. So if you also have confessions anyone wants to make about weird dreams where people you read too much of showed up, occupied bodies of your favorite musicians, let me know. The other thing I wanted to say before you switch directions is tonight we're having the live Homebrewed podcast, and at it on top of the chance to drink the Deacon-Structor Ale, where a monk has your face on it, and experience a French farmhouse saison. We're going to get to settle a little anthropological debate you and Pete have been having about his crypto-Calvinism. And since his plane got screwed up and he's not going to be here till later today, I thought it would be fun for you just to go ahead and get the upper hand and say why in the world two radical theologians would need to recapitulate a debate between Calvin and Stiletto from the Reformation with philosophical underpinnings.
Is that fair?
Oh, yeah. Look,
well, I didn't.
We have fallen asleep together on the couch, Pete and I. So I feel like once you've lived together and woken up at 3 a.m. to realize the movie wasn't that entertaining and go back to your beds quietly, like after that point, you can always throw the other one under the table when they're not there.
Well, in Belfast, at the Festival of Lights thing that we did in Belfast, Pete ran, we had a question and answer period, and I think people were writing, I don't know whether they're handwritten questions that they handed in or they raised from the floor, but someone asked them a question about his crypto-Calvinism, in particular the doctrine of total depravity. And all kinds of lights went on for me when I heard that remark, because it encapsulated probably the only difference between Pete and me that I can find. And that is the death of God tonality that he's deploying under the influence of Zizek versus the more birth of God hope tonality that I employ under the influence of Derrida, which I think ultimately is prophetic, because I think that ultimately part of my shtick as a scholar is to say that trying to relate Derrida to religion by looking at Christian Neoplatonic mysticism, which is what traditionally had been done, is a mistake. He's not Christian Neoplatonic mystic, he's Jew. And his Jewishness lies in several different domains. The preoccupation with complex writing and is Kabbalistic, but the ethical political tone is prophetic. And so the tonality for me as a writer and thinker is always on what Paul calls the new being, the future, the making all things new, transformation, hope, expectation, the affirmation of the unforeseeable possibility, the impossible possibility, etc. And one of the things that I don't like about Zizek is, although I've learned from Zizek, and Zizek is a resource for me too, is the tonality and what I think is the modernist, reductionist argument that God is dead and we're on our own, period. The sort of grim picture of human beings as sort of at bottom inhabited by a kind of void, which is, I think, it is. Once I heard this, whoever asked that question say it is a kind of doctrine of total depravity, but it's not total depravity because of the fall of Adam, but because of a kind of psychological wound that leads us. Totally depraved means not totally depraved, it means depraved in each faculty, so that each of the things, there's nothing that isn't affected by sin for Calvinists. It doesn't mean you're utterly worthless and corrupted. But it does mean that our faculties have been wounded by sin, and there's really no recovery from it. It's just sort of throwing yourself at the mercy of whatever. And I think that you see the same kind of thing in Zizek, and I think that it's showing up in Pete now, and I think that's regrettable. I think that he wants to keep his. I think he needs to regain the tone that he had in the earlier books, and that the last 2 or 3 books have been affected by this. And then I thought to myself, you know what this is? This is a repetition of an argument I grew up with, which was, as a Catholic, the argument between Thomas and the Augustinians. And the Augustinians had a strong theory of grace and sin. And Thomas Aquinas said, we are finite and we did fall and there is sin, but human nature is, God made human nature. It's great stuff. You don't get anywhere beaten up on what God made, if you have a high opinion of God. And so Thomas Aquinas, who was completely untouched by women, sex, lust, the whole thing. They called him the angelic doctor. He was, when he was 15 years old, he went joined the Dominicans, and he stayed in the Dominicans all his life, and he spent all of his time doing theology and teaching at the University of Paris, and didn't have anything like the interesting life Augustine had, And, I mean, you can barely tell he lived on Earth. I mean, once he made a reference to this river, the Seine, and I thought, glory be to God, he actually lived in France. He lived on Earth, because we called him the angelic doctor. And consequently, he had a totally upbeat view of human nature. He was an Aristotelian. He loved the natural world and the study of the natural world. When the church later on condemned Galileo, Thomas Aquinas would have just pulled his hair out if he had any. And nature, it's wonderful. This is what God made. And the reason he preferred Aristotle to Plato was that he believed in the incarnation, and he thought the material world had been made sacred by the incarnation. And so the material world started out being great, and then it got crowned with grace by the incarnation. So Thomas Aquinas didn't have anything like a doctrine of total depravity. The thought never crossed his mind. And I thought, but he did think we were finite, and we made mistakes, and we're stupid, and we're capable of malice, and he thought all those things, just like Aristotle. He said we're always pursuing the good, but sometimes we're really stupid about what we think is good, and which is Aristotle. You always do it because you think it's good. You think drugs is good. That's why you do it, because you're doing it insofar as it's good, even though it contradicts your judgment. But he didn't think that meant you were totally depraved. It just meant you were foolish. So my difference with Lacan and Zizek and Pete, I think ultimately goes back to the fact that I have a more Aristotelian notion of human being and a more prophetic notion of the future. And so the death of God for me is a moment in a larger story, and to thematize it the way Pete does and Zizek does, I think is... It's crypto-Calvinism. It's a great way to put it. I think that. So that's the only. Otherwise, Pete and I are very much in agreement about almost everything. But there's a kind of tonality there that I don't like.
So we can witness to him tonight when we talk to him about it. Thank you so much for talking and sharing about the experience of writing the book. And Jackie, everyone give Jack a hand. And Jonnie and I. So when we were talking about this happening, and the Theology for the People editor, Tony, was like, well, can you get someone who would look at the book and ask you questions about writing a book about Jesus, who might give you as hard a time as I did when I cut multiple chapters out and made you add new ones and not use words or footnote dead Germans. And maybe if they humiliate you enough in front of everyone, more people will decide, hey, I should try to do this because I can learn something. And if Tripp could even learn it, maybe someone else could. It was a completely interesting experience. So Jonnie, you're supposed to make me uncomfortable.
Doing that with silence right now. No. Yeah, let's talk about the book, Tripp. It's interesting. My first question is this: what does it mean here at a place with lots of radical theology folks that you seem to have Jesus mediating a God that's pretty damn alive in this book, and you got a pretty high Christology. Can you just briefly you got it in the pocket book here, but what would you describe are the most kind of crucial moves you make in the book regarding a pretty high Christology, which I think is awesome.
Well, what I thought was interesting the first time it got reviewed and sent back to me was methodologically, all evangelical readers are going to get super uncomfortable, and then your more progressive and radical theologian friends are just going to get more and more awkward the further the book goes on. And when they cut off the last chapter, which was Christology without God, they really got uncomfortable, so that was kind of the experience of doing it. Was I kept getting questions that were like the normal questions normal people ask about Jesus, not the ones you cover in PhD seminars. And to attend to the questions people in the church that are trying to wrestle with the story of this homeless dead Jew who somehow has something to do with what we're doing. Like, those questions provoked toning and telling the story of Jesus and his relationship to the life of the church differently. Like, I didn't set out to go, you know what, I'm going to have a chapter where I try to talk about Anselm in a nice way. Which is subverting the norm. It's subverting the norm.
Absolutely. You're subverting the norm that is here. So would you, I mean, so I read this, and this book is shorter than most of the, the amount of words you say on a single podcast is probably more than is in this book. So my thought is, being a good friend of yours, how hard was it to write a pocket book on, what's likely, I know a big chunk of it, part of, what you're about to write a dissertation on?
Well, it was painful. Like, when I handed in the first chapter, I got it sent back. This is 1/4 of your book, and there are 9,000 too many words about Kierkegaard. And I was like, well, who would want to talk about Kierkegaard with any less total words? And then there's a chapter called Getting High with Jesus, and I tell, like, the first time I got a religion paper back in undergrad, and the professor, his line is, I went and found the paper, and you remember that time you realized that you were going in debt to at least learn a language game that academics play? And in the paper, he says, like, this is, you have some methodological confusions between the assessment of beginning Christology to where it ascends to. I could see positive things in this paper, so try again. And I didn't know what it was, so then I go to the upperclassmen and religion majors. Does it have it there? Because I pulled the paper out, and it was just, like, painful.
This was
little
an excellent
18-year-old Jesus
Your
paper.
Confusion around methodological demarcations, categorizing tools for assessment, and some ambiguity around the nature of historical thematization in terms of revelation will not permit a higher grade. Oh. But it is clear that you will get there. Get a theological dictionary.
Yeah.
Bam.
I know. So I sat down with those undergrad religion majors.
That dude's tenured.
Yeah. Yeah. But, and I was like, so are you telling me that Christology from below and above is different than having a high and a low Christology? And they were like, yes. And I was like, why can't you pick something different so they don't sound like the same thing? And they were like, then why would you need the degree? And, so, like, in that chapter, one of the things I do is I kind of explain what theologians are doing when they do Christology, and how there are different ways of doing Christology, like Logos Christology, Spirit Christologies. One that's shaped by eschatology, one by salvation. Some begin with the person, some begin with the work. And then what was originally a chapter that surveyed a whole host of people, they were like, you can only keep one. And I was like, well, clearly it's going to be John Cobb. And so the attempt to explain John Cobb in a short period of time in a persuasive way was really painful.
Which is my next question.
Oh.
Do it now.
No. But
Well, do it. Let's do it this way. So you end up with a pretty high Christology, and you work there, and you come from above in some way in a Cobb way. Let's make it relevant to this conference. Say, what does your kind of move, your Christological moves, your Logos Christology, mean in terms of the political?
Well, one of the things I kind of talk about in the book is my return to God in general. Because I read like Tillich and Bonhoeffer and stuff in high school, and when I started being a philosophy major, I got rid of God rather quick and was totally just comfortable, like Marcus Borging it. Because if you're in the South, everyone's a Christian, even if you don't want to be. And just being more politically active and not really worrying about God. And I tell the story in the book of kind of being assigned for a proclamation, like a speaking class. They were talking about proclamation, like, well, you're a philosophy major, so you should do a sermon. And they told me to preach on like the crucifixion and resurrection. And, this professor thinks they're being nice to me, because nothing's more fun than in a college speaking class to preach a resurrection sermon. And I was sitting there reading the Luke text, and where Jesus goes, forgive them, Father, for they don't know what they are doing. And I thought, well, if I'm going to kind of just decide to locate myself in some tradition to cultivate something simulating meaning in the face of my impending death, then one that's as realistic about how screwed up human beings are to say we don't even know what we're doing, and postulates a form of love that extends into that, then forgive them, then I'll pick that one. And so it was really, for me, that aesthetic return to Christocentric definitions of God that inspired the book. And the movement of the book it is written for, of the 50,000 people listening to the podcast, tons of them are like edgy evangelicals asking a question for the first time. And some of them are here presenting papers who now think I'm way too conservative, but years ago listened to the podcast. I'm like the gateway drug to subvert the norm. And in it, I kind of say I'm down with Kierkegaard. Come on, evangelical Christians, I still love Jesus. And in it, I kind of postulate that the postmodern situation is one, and Record does this, but you're not allowed to footnote him in the series. He talks about a post-religious form of faith. So no longer the debates between like a theist and an atheist, and now we're arguing over evidence that demands a verdict, namely that this one homeless guy on one planet among billions is the image of the invisible God. We're no longer kind of in that situation, but the line goes between us. So we're all simultaneously skeptics and believers, and you can't escape false consciousness. And so that kind of situation set up for then dealing with the questions around the Jewish situation of Jesus, his articulation of the kingdom of God. And they do edit your book, though, and sometimes you find out that they changed words like when it's printed. And as a minister, I try to come up with catchy things. And so to getting rid of hierarchy and patriarchy out of the kingdom of God, the chapter is called Drop the G, and Abba says drop the G, and then there's a line in it that said, as a minister, I always say kingdom of God, and it's fun because people slowly notice, and then they ask you why, and I say, well, Abba says drop the G, and when you do, you lose the cock and the crown. And it's real catchy. And Fortress was like, obviously you can't say that. Let's substitute phallus. Yeah, that's a lot better. So I got the day I flew out when the book came out on the 1st, right before I flew out from LA to start going, to breweries and bars talking about the book to people listening to podcasts. I get the book, have not read that they changed it, and proceed to read it out loud. All of a sudden it felt gross. The dude right on the front, right there, he goes, oh. I was like, what do you mean? He's like, on the podcast, you always joke cock in the crown. That's funny. Phallus in the crown, visual image. And I was supposed to keep talking about the book. But in it, even in addressing those type of issues, and like gendered language for God and stuff, and I talk about my son, who at our house, we never use masculine language for God because the church has been using it so long. We thought, if we always use feminine imagery or creation imagery, it might even out somewhat in our kids' minds. I tell the story that he was all good, our mother who art in heaven, for years. And then when he was in 5-year-old Sunday school class, he came home and had learned the real prayer and how to pray the real way. And I was like, oh, this is really how powerful that ideology exists in the church. And I work at a UCC church in Los Angeles. We're really not known for being like rigidly conservative.
Creedal rigor,
Yeah, creedal rigor. Unitarians considering Christ kind of thing. So the and after that, he was like real indignant about how real Christians do it the other way. And I'm like, you should go to worship because we don't do that. And so they're sitting there, and after his sister's born, he reevaluates things. And like a good 6-year-old, boy, at this time, your favorite story in all the Bible is Deborah, because she kicks ass for God, and you like all the violent stuff in the Old Testament. He's like, I want to read this one. And so we're sitting there, and out of nowhere, he brings back up whether or not gendered language you can use for God. And he's like, well, I've decided that we should probably go back to calling God a woman, even though God probably does have a penis and a vagina. But Cora, it's clear Cora likes mom a lot better than you. And Jesus is more of like her brother, and she likes me. So that's why we should call God mother. And I was like, that's really cool. And then he goes, yeah, maybe she could be like Deborah later, except instead of like leading an army to kill everyone, she shows up with cupcakes. And like, what a great way of like inverting the power. So I felt a little bit better on parenting at that point. It's like a nonviolent assault of cupcakes to bring the people together. But even the way of telling those stories, my goal is like to be like the conveyor belt for people via the podcast or the text, to open them up to parts of the Christian tradition, to ask questions that could feel threatening in rather playful ways, and hopefully expand the theological depth horizons of people that would never naturally show up at a place like this or that kind of thing.
Right.
I feel like I'm an evangelist for not crappy Christianities.
I think that's a good.
Yeah, just 5 minutes.
Okay.
Don't worry, I set my alarm because I heard the request. I have to go over. And so that was actually set up to answer your question.
What are the politics of your copy Christology?
Oh yeah, so then at the end, when I pick back up being the skeptic and believer, and I give like the politics of liberation Christology and that kind of thing, I say that what might be really cool and even more subversive isn't to like doubt the fourth point of Calvinism or biblical inerrancy or some particular atonement theory or even the existence of God. What if it would be to question the actual reigning world religion, economism, and where are some places that you could be a skeptic heretic to kind of the military industrial complex, the prison system, the reign of patriarch or hierarchy, racism, and all these things. That if the form of the skeptical believer is not just holding our understanding and story of the faith differently, but also recognizing the subversive nature of Christian allegiance, that it calls into question the finality of global capitalism and its oppression of the poor and destruction of the planet. And for me, that is, you get there and you aren't anticipating it theoretically the whole book. The first response I got from Fortress was, if you want people to read the whole thing, don't tell them what you're about to do. And I was like, really? Because I thought that's what I'm supposed to do when you write things. They're like, no. You're paying someone to read and grade your paper in graduate school. They're paying to not be bored after the second chapter.
Well, it seems like, too, what would be the difference? What does it mean? There seems to be a materiality piece to it that you're subtly, use the language of God in the world. It seems to be quite different for you as a panentheist that affects your politics, that leads it to that, necessarily kind of ecological perspective without the language.
Yeah. Well, there's a whole section on developing ecological Christologies. And so I deal basically with economics and ecology and different versions of Christologies in the 20th and 21st century to show that the church has always tried to describe its experience of the depth dimension as always Jesus-y shaped. And that's kind of as much as you can do in defining Christianity, and so there are different Jesus-y shapes. So like I have like John Sobrino's version next to Elizabeth Johnson's kind of eco-feminist account of the story of Jesus and the ecological crisis, to Moltmann and that kind of thing. And my goal, because it's a guide obviously, is to mostly give people whatever avenue they need to have to get around to like not being horrible. Because I feel like God should at least just be as nice as Jesus.